Hello to everyone coming in. We're just going to take a few minutes to wait until everyone gets in before we can officially get started. Okay, so we just launched a poll. If possible, as you're coming in, it would be really helpful if you could um, just fill out this poll so we know who's here today. This training will be up on our website later, but we just want to know who's present right now as we're doing it live. And I'll wait probably until about 4:05 to get started with content, just to allow folks to have a little bit of time to join the presentation. And just a heads up, like I mentioned before, this training will be recorded. So we'll have a section at the end that's not recorded if you want to ask specific questions. But we encourage everyone to ask questions throughout the training using the Q&A function. Okay, it's 4:03, so I'll give a few more minutes before we jump in. And we'll also be sending a copy of these slides to you after the training. So if there are links embedded or anything like that, you should receive them. So you don't have to like scramble to copy them during the webinar. Okay, so it's almost 4:05, so I'll get started. My name is Ross Baker. I'm a school discipline and special education advocate with Advocates for Children. I'm on our school justice project, and my coworker Karen Herrera is navigating the presentation, and she'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions about anything, feel free to answer in the chat, and someone should be able, or feel free to put it in the chat and someone should be able to respond. Or there will be pauses for questions. And again, this is recorded, so we'll have a section at the very end that's not recorded, where we can go into specific questions if folks have them. So just to jump in, what is Advocates for Children? We're an independent agency that protects the education rights of all New York City students. We offer guides and resources, workshops and trainings like this one, and then free legal services to low-income families. A lot of these services are around school placement. Also, sorry for any noise outside. City can just be loud. And we also have a helpline number, which I think is both behind me and on this slide. And you can contact them Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for general advice, or if you feel like you might need an advocate for something. Specifically, we have projects that focus on early childhood, charter schools, students in temporary housing, immigrant families, school justice, and overage students. So this is just a brief overview of what we're going to be discussing today. So as you saw from the Eventbrite, we're going to be talking about bullying today. So what is bullying? How are students protected from bullying? How is bullying reported? How is bullying investigated? How is bullying determined? How should schools respond to bullying? Transfers, what are the rights of students with disabilities? And then SEL, or social emotional supports for students, and then resources. Okay, so everybody who's in the webinar has likely witnessed bullying. You might have experienced it too, or you might have engaged in bullying. We all have personal experiences with bullying and have different definitions that we use for the word bullying. But I'm going to talk about the legal definition that the DOE uses. So bullying can be oral, written, physical, or electronic. But bullying is something that substantially interferes with student learning, substantially interferes with students' mental, emotional, and physical well-being, reasonably causes fear for safety, and reasonably expected to cause physical injury or emotional harm. But overall, these things come together to create a hostile environment. And that's really at the core of what bullying is. So what kind of behaviors may be forms of bullying? Bullying can take many different forms. The laws and the regulations list these types of behaviors as bullying. So physical violence, stalking, threats, taunts, or teasing, aggressive or menacing gestures, derogatory language, name calling or slurs, exclusion from peer group designed to humiliate or isolate. It's important to frame bullying as behavior because oftentimes students play fluid roles when it comes to bullying, where in one incident, a student might be the aggressor towards another student, and in another, they might be the target. So I think just for the sake of this presentation, it's important to keep in mind that just not to label as a bully or bullied, because it's important to understand that people can occupy different roles. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is also a form of behavior. It includes written or graphic material, including graffiti, photographs, drawings, or videos containing comments or stereotypes that are electronically circulated or are written or printed. Sure, you're familiar with Snapchat, Facebook, YouTube, Zoom chat, TikTok, Google Classroom. Anything that meets the definition in the previous slide can be considered bullying. In order for a student to be disciplined for cyberbullying, there must be a connection between the cyberbullying and school. So it must happen between members of the same school community, or maybe reference something that might happen in schools. This is just important to know as students are getting older, and also as technology continues to be incorporated in the DOE's curriculum. So how do we recognize bullying? So some key characteristics to look for are power differences, actual or intention or real intention to cause harm, if it's repetitive, and it's most likely to occur if it's towards commonly targeted groups, if there's low adult presence. So this is why cyberbullying is so prevalent, because it's harder to monitor what's happening on the internet, and all of us are pretty constantly connected to the internet. So some bullying can be based on a student's membership in a group. And I won't go through everything, but you can see that on the slide that a lot of different groups are included. And then membership can be actual or perceived. So this is kind of complicated, but a student might actually identify with one of these groups, or a student might not, but another student might think or assume that a student does and bully them based on that perceived identity. Um, so uh, laws and regulations that govern the DOE provide that students can't be bullied for any specific reason regarding their identity. And the goal of this is to protect students from bullying based on identity. All right, so we have a break here for questions, though I don't see any, and I know that Connor, my coworker, is monitoring the chat. So for now, I'll continue on. So just to get a little bit into like the technicalities around bullying in the DOE, a lot of these regulations come from DASA, or the Dignity for All Students Act, which are part of Chancellor's Regulations A 832. So the law says that all students have right to safe learning environment. Students should not be afraid to go to school. There should be no bullying, harassment, or discrimination because of actual or perceived membership group status, like we discussed on the last slide. And school districts must report bullying incidents at the end of every year to the New York State Education Department. Additionally, New York State's human rights laws also protect students from bullying, along with the DOE regulations. And then at the bottom, we have a link to the DOE Respect for All webpage with FAQs surrounding bullying that can help supplement some of the information in this presentation. Okay, so what must schools do? So under DASA, schools must create a plan to prevent and address harassment, intimidation, and bullying. They must publicize anti-bullying rules, share RFA, or Respect for All, with students and parents annually, and make CRA 832 available to parents. So essentially, make Chancellor's regulations available, provide parents with the knowledge that they're entitled to surrounding bullying and surrounding their rights. So some of that might come in the discipline code or other documentation that schools can provide. They must train a staff member to be the Respect for All liaison. We'll talk a little bit more about the RFA liaison, but the RFA liaison is a person who can oversee the training related to bullying for students and faculty, but also who is responsible for investigating a lot of bullying at the school level. And then lastly, schools must act. So they must report accusations on the ORS database, which is a database that the DOE uses to log any behavior-related incidents. And if they must investigate all reports. And then if schools become aware of bullying behavior, they're required to stop it from occurring. Okay, so yes, charter school operates different. So yeah, we discussed earlier a little bit about the New York State ed laws. We also have a charter school discipline guide on our website that maybe we can send around later, which is helpful. But yeah, it is an important note that this presentation focuses on DOE schools and regulations. So the RFA liaison is a school staff member trained in bullying, discrimination, and harassment issues and reporting, investigation, and responses. Each school is required to have an RFA. And it can be someone with other responsibilities. So oftentimes it'll be a school counselor, an AP, school admin, someone who's knowledgeable and has relationships with students, and is already part of the school community. And the goal of the RFA liaison is to prevent bullying, harassment, and discrimination in all schools. So to find the name of an RFA liaison, you can visit your school's DOE website and find the contact information for the school's RFA liaison. It should be available there. And then also we link to additional resources. And like I said before, there'll be a recording of this webinar, and we'll send a copy of the slides out later. So any of the links that are here, folks will be able to engage with them and access them on their own. All right, I'll take a break here for questions briefly. I don't see any in the Q&A. I saw there were a few things in the chat. Okay. Yes, in that case, then we can continue on. So how to report bullying. School staff are obligated to report bullying. So there must be an oral report made to the principal or RFA liaison within 1 day, and a written report filed within 2 days. So if a school staff member observes something that they think may be bullying, they must report it. And email sometimes is a helpful way to report bullying. So anyone can report bullying to schools. There's a centralized respect for all at schools.nyc.gov email where you can report any complaints. And it's helpful because some people prefer that due to anonymity. You can submit a complaint online at the link here. There's also a DOE complaint form. And then there's a central number to submit any reports or concerns about bullying. So how to report bullying by school staff. Actions by school staff towards students and families can also be considered bullying, harassment, or discrimination. To report bullying, harassment, or discrimination by school staff, tell the principal, email the RFA central email, call OSI. So this is the Office of Special Investigations, and they actually have a special form and a response line for specific complaints about bullying related to school staff. I think technically the language on the website is about corporal punishment, but this is the resource to use if there's bullying or inappropriate conduct by school staff. And then we have a link to an OSI report at this link right here. And discrimination against parents based on race, color, ethnicity, national origin, immigration status, or religion can also contact the DOE Office of Opportunity and Diversity. So it's important in reporting the bullying. So to report bullying, it's important to have something in writing and with a proof of date sent. So then that can act as like a guiding date and a guiding prompt when following up. It's important to include details of what occurred, who was involved, when and where the incidents took place, and how the incidents harmed the students. And then the regulations also protect people who report bullying from any retaliation. Okay, so how is bullying investigated? Once a complaint is made, it must be entered into the online occurrence reporting system, or ORS, which I mentioned before. So it must be entered by a school official within 24 hours of receiving the oral report. And and the principal must investigate the complaint within 5 days of the oral report. So bullying is investigated in a 3-step process by schools. So the target or the victim, I guess, will be interviewed first. So they will request a written statement describing behavior and witnesses. And this conversation will be documented. Next, the person who is alleged to have engaged in the bullying behavior will be advised to stop the behavior if it occurred, conversation will be documented and a written statement will be made. And then witnesses or others involved will be included in the investigation process. So at the beginning of the investigation, the principal or Respect for All liaison must contact the parents of all students involved to discuss the allegations. Schools cannot contact parents if there are safety concerns. So if there are immediate concerns to a student's well-being, or if there's immediate or imminent harm, the schools are not required to contact parents. At the conclusion of the investigation, the principal or the Respect for All liaison must report the results of the investigation to the parents of all students involved. So if a student is involved in this investigation or involved in the investigative process, their parents should be told by the school, and the parents should be notified at the end of the investigation. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about how bullying is determined. So any decision about what is considered bullying must consider the totality of circumstances, including the history of similar incidents, ages of everyone involved, the nature and severity, frequency and duration, number of persons involved, the context, and then where the incidents occurred. And like I mentioned before, in the definition of bullying from the DOE, a lot of it is about power differences. So this is why things like ages of person involved, nature and severity, and frequency are important in investigating bullying. All right, so we can pause here for questions. I think my colleague Karen, who's manning the chat, will be able to answer some of the questions. For OSI, yes, it should be the same contact for charter schools, so the Office of Special Investigation. AI, IE, what happened in Jersey? I'm not sure if there have been updates in the policy regarding AI. There aren't many that I'm aware of. And also, if possible, could you please use the Q&A function rather than the chat? Sorry, we should have turned that off earlier. But keep asking questions. And yeah, we should have done that earlier. So yeah, please keep asking questions and my colleague will try to respond as I'm going. And I'll try to intercept a few, but I also want to make sure that I'm getting the information out that I need to. So how should schools respond to bullying? First and foremost, they must stop the bullying behavior, prohibit retaliation against anyone involved, recommend supports and interventions for all involved. So this can be counseling, positive behavioral supports or PBIS, education resources and collaborative problem solving, and then restorative practices, including conflict resolution or mediation. And we always advocate that schools use progressive discipline if the behavior violated the discipline code. So we'll talk a little bit more later about what that means. But in a sense, it means that in an ideal world, the behavior will be a teaching moment. So students aren't being taken out of the classroom and schools aren't resorting to drastic measures like exclusionary discipline. It's an opportunity to offer all students involved more support and support students in refocusing and understanding on how their behavior can be harmful. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. In a discipline code, there is some language about restorative practices and progressive discipline, along with disciplinary codes that kind of correspond to examples of bullying behavior. So what happens if the school does not respond or the bullying continues? Again, reach out to the central DOE websites or the Respect for All email, like we've mentioned before. you can contact the superintendent's office or escalation staff assistance form on the RFA webpage. If there's no success there, you can escalate to the Department of Human Rights. They have a complaint form linked here, and they also have a hotline here. This is a New York State Department, and they should be responsive. Again, though, with all these steps, this is why it's super important to make sure that there's a date and kind of a paper trail in reporting any bullying, just so throughout the process you can show folks where you've been reporting things, who you've been reporting to, because unfortunately, it's really hard for a higher office to take action if you're saying you reported something, you're like, well, I called the principal and I said this. It's always, always, always helpful to have something in writing. And then if you're not having any more luck with that, you can file a complaint with the DOE Office of Civil Rights. So this must be within 180 days of the incident. And there's an OCR complaint form linked here. And just a note, the OCR timeline, it's an impartial office, so it does take a really long time. But it is kind of like the furthest escalation that we have in reporting bullying behavior. So how can parents work with the school? Parents can create safety plans or individual support plans. So this is a written plan to support students in any bullying behavior that's happening to them. So often a safety plan or an individual support plan will identify physical locations and also staff members who are where the student feels safe or who the student feels safe talking to. It's kind of like an immediate crisis intervention step where it's a plan to guarantee the immediate safety of a child. Schools can change seats, schedule programs, or lunch or dismissal times for students. So sometimes if there's an ongoing conflict between two students and both or one of the students is engaging in bullying behavior, the school can work with the family to change some aspect of the school day so there's less overlap. Families can request counseling for students, notify staff of bullying history. Families can advocate for restorative practices like mediation, suggest staff or student trainings for the school, designate safe adults for students, and then ask staff to keep a lookout for conflict. And it's important to include a young person in this process, just so they feel like they have agency in the decision making, as this is something that ultimately affects them. And they're, like they might want to stop the bullying, obviously, but they also might not want drastic changes to their schedule or to their social life. So it's important to include the young person in this process and make sure that's collaborative between the family, the student, and the school. So some responses to cyberbullying in the remote environment. So request that the school teach all students about digital citizenship so they know how and understand the importance of responsible online behavior. Ask for school to provide students with social emotional supports and request restorative practices to help address conflicts. So this is a little bit tougher because I think this was more a response to the virtual classroom. But the same goes for cyberbullying that occurs elsewhere, and then also where the nexus is the school, and that's where the bullying is also playing out. So some types of restorative practices are collaborative negotiation, circle process, peer mediation, formal restorative conferencing. And there's data that shows that these practices tend to improve behavior and academic outcomes and lower repeated behavioral incidents. So who should you reach out to in the DOE? Start with the school. It's always best to start with the school and go more local. And ideally, as families engage in the school community, hopefully there are folks at the school that families have relationships with. So whether it's a parent coordinator, a social worker, a school counselor, principal, or school-based support team, it's always important to start with a school because they're also the individuals who are seeing the student every day and are engaging with the student body every day. But if there's no response there, you can contact the district superintendent's office. So family support coordinator, which you can also find on the DOE website for your school, special education manager, restorative justice director, behavioral expert, or the superintendent directly. You can also always reach out to the DOE Central Office of Special Education. So you can reach out to specialeducation@schools.nyc.gov or the Respect for All email. And yeah, and then we have a list of the DOE contacts. But it's always helpful to keep a list of contacts you've spoken with, as well as dates of the conversations with school staff. If possible, keep emails or text messages between you and school staff. Track services that your students receiving. It's always important to have documentation throughout this process so that further down the line, should you need to escalate, you always have something to refer to or to fall back on. All right, so I'll pause here again for questions. It seems like there's a few in the chat that I think my colleague Carden is answering. I see, are there going to be policies regards to AI? I'm not sure about that right now, but I imagine the DOE is probably going to amend some of the discipline code or something to, or bullying regulations as that becomes more prevalent. I see a parent got an excuse, the school is closing, no worries, enrollment started already from staff. I'm not sure about that question. So I'll defer to my colleague on that one. If students tell parents about bullying, how to understand the truth. So that's a good question. I mean, I think it's always helpful to, as teachers are required to report bullying or any incident of bullying that they hear about. I think it's always a helpful opportunity or helpful to just try to report it to the school if it's based in the school. Just because if it is happening at the school should have resources to investigate claims of bullying, and they should be able to talk with the students involved directly, and they should be able to keep families involved in the process. So I'll continue on to the next slide where we're going to talk a little bit about school transfers. So safety transfers can be difficult to get. Details of what's been happening are important. Get as many documents as you can, so school documents, police reports, medical records. But this is a pretty serious transfer where a student feels like their safety is in danger. Guidance transfers are for if students aren't progressing academically or socially. A transfer would help the student. A family must request this, so a school can't use this or force a student out. So there have been certain circumstances where we've heard like, oh, the school said that we have to do a guidance transfer. The family is always entitled to have the final say. So a school can't just say like, you know, this is too difficult to deal with, we're going to kick you out. It must be, the family must be involved, and a final decision is made by an enrollment officer on whether guidance transfers are approved. And in doing that, it might be helpful to reach out to your family welcome center or the Office of Special Education. And then additionally, there are other transfers like a medical transfer, sibling transfer, child care hardship transfer, and travel hardship transfers. We have a link to that here at the bottom if folks want more information on that. All right, so we're going to shift gears a little bit here. So we're going to discuss considerations for students with disabilities. Bullying can impact the child's academic, social, emotional, or behavioral functioning. If the student is engaging in or experiencing bullying, it's important to request an IEP meeting to address bullying behavior, discuss this concern at an IEP meeting. And an IEP is a legal document. So if there are supports or things that families discuss related to bullying on the IEP, those are tools that the DOE and the school are required to implement. So this is a really good resource for families to address concerns and get them in writing in a legal document so that the school is required to follow up and actually implement the services that have been discussed. Consider requesting a functional behavioral assessment or an FBA to develop a behavioral intervention plan or a BIP. An FBA is an evaluation to find out where a behavior is occurring, why it's occurring, the function of it. So to understand really like what's driving a behavior. And then a BIP is a plan with resources and supports in the classroom and in the school to intervene when that behavior is happening. And it's important also to have IEP goals that account for bullying behavior. Just because, like I said, the IEP is a legal document, and it's helpful to have it in writing and have a plan where the school and the family have come together to document supports for the student. Okay, so I guess I jumped the gun a little bit, but yeah, this is a functional behavioral assessment. So what's the behavior? Why does it occur? How often? Where? And for how long? So then next, this is going to be about the BIP. So the components of an FBA are classroom observations, reports, and interviews. So there must be baseline information about the frequency and severity of a behavior. And then the BIP must take specific steps the school will take to prevent the behavior from occurring, help the student build the skills to manage their behavior, respond to triggers in the environment, and manage the behavior if it occurs. It should include de-escalating or reducing the severity of the behavior. And then also similar to an IEP, a BIP should be measurable. So it should be something where there's some agreed upon data or metric that's going to be used between or by the school to see how much or how often a behavior is occurring, to see if the BIP is helping, just because it's easier to have something concrete to refer back to when tracking behavior. And then also the BIP, like the IEP, can be updated regularly. So if you're able to get an FBA and a BIP and you see that it seems like the same behaviors are occurring or a student's getting the same type of discipline over and over, you're entitled to ask the school to reevaluate the BIP. So students with disabilities also have discipline rights, even if the alleged behavior is considered bullying. Right that students have if they're accused of bullying, for example, and are suspended, is a manifestation determination review to determine if a student, if a behavior was a manifestation of a student's disability. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about social, emotional, and behavioral supports. We actually are going to have a webinar all about this, I think towards the beginning of December. So I'm sure our staff will send that out on Eventbrite, but I'm just going to touch on a few things here. So it's important to work with a student's clinical team if they're receiving therapy or medication management outside of the school or at another agency. It's always really helpful to have an agency and supports connected to the school so that there's no gaps in communication or in kind of behavioral care. So school-based supports are typically at-risk counseling, informal behavior interventions, crisis de-escalation plans, STH community or coordinators or single shepherd, and school-based mental health services. So I'll talk a little bit more about those. At-risk counseling is typically more crisis or specific circumstance related. So it's usually for 8 to 12 weeks. It's not mandated. It doesn't go on an IEP. And it's provided as needed. So it's usually with a school official, like a social worker or guidance counselor, someone who's staffed at the school. Informal behavioral interventions are implemented by teachers, guidance counselors, or paras. They may be for limited time periods. They could be a behavior contract or behavior tracker, points or reward system, or something of that effect. Crisis de-escalation plan is a strategy that includes strategies for de-escalating behavioral crisis, identifies locations in the school building where students in crisis may be safely isolated from other students, identifies any school staff trained in de-escalation techniques, and identifies resources within the community. And then every school is supposed to have some type of mental health support for students. It could be anything from having access to a mental health consultant to help train staff or provide assistance on individual cases, to having access to crisis intervention staff during emergencies, to having a mental health clinic on site at the school. And for a list of school-specific mental health services, we have a link down here. Like I mentioned before too, the copy of the slides will be sent out so you can engage with all of the links included in the presentation. And then additionally, some schools have SDH community coordinators or single shepherd success mentors who are assigned to help to schools with the greatest concentration of students in shelters and help support youth in temporary housing. Students in foster care also receive support from these staff, and they don't necessarily provide mental health services, but they offer social emotional support to students and focus on attendance and school engagement. But again, they should be as part of a student's behavioral health team so that a student's needs are being met both in school and out of school. Okay, so for school-based mental health services, there are school response clinicians, school response teams, school mental health specialist programs, intervention programs, schools with health and hospital mental health clinic partnerships, community school mental health programs, or school-based health centers and mental health clinics. So again, these services are limited to schools, so not each school will have all of these services. But again, you can navigate and find out where these services are offered on the DOE website. Additionally, like I said before, we're going to have a behavioral support webinar where we'll talk about these things a little bit more in depth. So each school has a DOE specific website that lists a specific mental health team or mental health supports in schools. So you can go to schoolsearch.schools.nyc and type in the name of school or address and any information you have, and then select search. And then once you're there, you can find a mental health and wellness tab that will list the specific supports or services that a school has. And this is just an example of what it may look like. So there will be school-specific resources and then also district resources that families can access from that school. So yeah, this is just an example of what it will look like. But like I said, you'll have the links. You can navigate all these resources after the presentation. So the DOE embraces progressive discipline. So in the DOE's mission statement, overly punitive methods of discipline are not in the best interest of students. Students are better served by providing positive supports that teach students social, emotional, and behavioral skills. The DOE aims to provide enhanced support to students with special needs or those suffering from trauma due to exposure to poverty or violence. And in their mission statement, the DOE aims to reduce suspensions and classroom exclusion, as classroom exclusion is tied to lower academic and behavioral outcomes. So before I spoke a little bit about restorative justice, all New York City elementary schools must provide social emotional learning to students, and all middle and high schools must implement restorative justice practices. So again, this can include circles, peer mediation, community service. And it's not just used to respond to an incident. Schools can implement regular community circles as preventive measures, but really these are ways to build community and build trust among the school community, between students, between staff, so that when issues come up or when there's like a breach of behavior contract or something, the school feels equipped and the students feel equipped to handle a problem collaboratively. And then again, this will be on, this next slide will be included in our upcoming presentation on behavioral supports. But I'll talk a little bit about these behavior management tools. So these techniques can be used in school, sometimes at home. So a visual daily schedule can be really helpful for students, a cognitive break between tasks, movement breaks, verbal and visual cues, a behavioral contract, a behavior chart, a reward system for appropriate behavior, consistent use of positive reinforcement, and then daily teacher feedback to both the student and parent. And then I think we have a repeat slide actually, so we can go on to our resources next. Some of the things that I've talked about are the Dignity for All Students Act, so you can look at that here at this link. Information about Respect for All policies and the Respect for All liaison. Information for developing an IEP that stops and prevents bullying, cyberbullying and digital citizenship, and then a link to our guides and resources. All right, and then we should have a poll at the end for folks. I know I went through things pretty fast, and again, we're gonna stay on for a little while, so if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And probably around 4:50 or 4:52 or something, we'll stop the recording in case there are specific questions. So thanks to everyone who attended. And yeah, please take the feedback survey, and then also if you have any questions or anything, please put them in the chat. And we'll do our best to answer them. So thank you all. All right, and maybe now, I guess, since some folks have left, we can stop the recording.